With so many World Cup qualifiers on the line for the month of April and so much drama across the world in the form of upsets, small teams stepping up, big teams dominating as always, Concacaf was a flickering light amongst a couple of great federations that were participating in their tournaments at the same time. But we had some great drama and a ton of fun here on the channel as well. If you guys followed along, I know we had a ton of new subscribers come and check us out for our watch parties that we did for the games. We couldn't catch every game on the channel, but we did watch along with several matches, and we're live every day that there were games in some capacity to enjoy some CONCACAF action. A lot of you guys seem to enjoy it. And I think it said a lot about the futsal community and its desire to consume this sport and to enjoy this sport that so many of you came to hang out with me on my channel, and I wasn't even airing the game. Due to copyright, I could not air it on my channel, of course. If you guys are familiar with copyright rules on YouTube, I don't know how other channels do that and get away with it, but I certainly didn't. We gave it a quick try, and it just wasn't in the cards. But the important thing is to cover the highs and lows of that tournament, especially if you guys couldn't participate with us on those watch-alongs. We'll see if we do those in the future since they were so successful. But most importantly, let's cover the highs and lows and talk about who made it through to represent CONCACAF in the World Cup in September in Uzbekistan. Let's break it down group by group to get started here. Group A was a no-brainer for everyone, I think, going into this tournament because Costa Rica, three-time defending champions going into this tournament, surely they would not have any problems with the likes of Haiti and Suriname, and Mexico, who did not show well in the last tournament, albeit 3 years ago. They did step up in a big way in this tournament, and it came down to the last day to decide who would come out with first place. Your first place winner being Costa Rica at the end of it all. They finished the group undefeated. Mexico, with a great performance all around, comes into second place. Suriname really didn't put up much of a fight except against Haiti. And then, of course, the Haitian side. When you think about what's going on with Haiti and its folks there, they are going through a ton of adversity right now in their country. And a lot of other countries had to come together and work together to get the Haitian national team out of their country and into Nicaragua. Canadians, Americans, Marines, visas, all part of the drama, even donated shoes to get equipment down to Nicaragua for those players to meet them there. It was a massive ordeal for those players, and they showed up only 2 hours before their first kickoff in limited numbers. They did something that was really impressive, though. They've scored the most goals against Costa Rica of any competition Costa Rica has seen in the last 8 years, which is really cool to see from such a small country that had to fight through so much just to be there. So congratulations to the Haitian side. Even though there aren't points on the board, there were accomplishments made, and they should be very proud. I can't imagine what it's like to play a game when you have that dark cloud looming over your head thinking about what's going on back home. So kudos to them. Now let's move on to Group B. Not too many sexy storylines here or dramatic heartstring pullers in that way, but this really ended up being the group of death of the groups, which I think people thought maybe more Group C would be going into the tournament, as I talked to a few people prior to things going live. But this Group B was an absolute nail-biter. Panama comes out on top with 6 points, with only a single blemish on their record. Cuba, second place with 5. And Canada, one of the best third-place teams, moves on to the quarterfinals with that third-place spot with 4 points. Host Nicaragua, although they only had 1 point from a draw in this contest, they should be proud of their accomplishments. They played really well. They were in most games, and they fought to the end. So kudos to them, and a great, attractive, beautiful stadium that they got to host this thing in front of their home fans. Group C. Now, this is where I have some emotion. I'm going to do my best to save that for later. There will be a rant about this. I'm going to probably do that in a second part video. So this will release today. Guys, if you keep an eye on the channel, you will hear my personal opinion specifically on the United States of America and what needs to happen next. But we'll try and save that for another video. Otherwise, this thing will be 20 minutes long. I've tried 3 or 4 different times to record this, a couple different ways and styles and formats, and I can't seem to keep it all together in one video without it being a very daunting watch. So we will break it up into 2 parts for you guys. Feel free to watch that if you want my opinion. If not, skip over it. Wait for something better to come on. But I can promise you this, it will be passionate. USA ends up being the second best third-place team across 3 groups to get that last quarterfinal spot. They had a very unconvincing performance in the group stage, but still came away with 4 points, as Trinidad and Tobago in last just could not seem to get it together and put a full game together. They were kind of giving points away to everybody through this tournament. One of the big shockers, Dominican Republic gets second place. They defeated the United States in their second game, and they finished the group with 6 points. And then Guatemala, even with a little scare, with a couple of rocky performances during the group stage, finds their way through with a total of 7 points. They move on as well to go to the quarterfinals. Now, this is where things get really exciting for these teams, because this is where it's all on the line. If you win your quarterfinal match, you are in the World Cup in Uzbekistan. So regardless of what else happens during this tournament, if you can win that quarterfinal game, then you're in. You're in for the greatest tournament in the world. So when we break it down, Costa Rica versus Canada. Costa Rica did make it through and knock out one of the best third place teams, Canada, but this Canadian side fought all the way to the end, and had it not been for a bit of an emotional second yellow card to one of their players in the last minute and a half, I would say it was very possible this game went into overtime or even went into Canada's favor. They had all the momentum going into the end of this game, and then unfortunately ended up a man down for the remainder of it, but you couldn't tell by the way they played. Just wasn't enough to get by a very talented Costa Rican side. Panama that faces the United States, and Panama decided they were going to sit back and absorb the pressure. They must have been watching film and realized that the United States was really not throwing anything at goal in a convincing way, and they decided that they were just going to lock down defensively, hold the lead, and kill the game. And a lack of heart from the United States and a lack of willingness to push forward and take dangerous chances on goal and make things work, they just couldn't put it together. They got a consolation goal at the very end. Otherwise, this would have been 2-0, and they would have been the first team in the tournament to be blanked. But they just dodged that at the very end of the game from getting that illustrious title. So next, we look at Guatemala and Mexico. Now, interesting thing about this, we talked about Guatemala being a little shaky in parts of their games. And in this game, they started out going down 3-0 to Mexico, which was a big shock to most. Even with those couple of struggles in the group stage, I think most people thought Guatemala was a lock. But sure enough, they did make sure that came to fruition as they scored 8 unanswered goals before Mexico ended up back on the score sheet. 9-4 the final there. And then the Dominican Republic and Cuba, one of the great games that we saw across this entire tournament. Two teams fighting like mad, really impressing fans. Really saw a lot of fans in our live streams that were big fans of these two teams. Cuba edging out the Dominican Republic 2-1 just by 1 goal. And then in the semifinals, they kept me up late for that watch party, guys. I loved it. I was up till about 12:30 in the morning with you guys watching the stream. And Costa Rica and Cuba fought a 3-3 draw. Costa Rica getting ahead, Cuba tying it, back, forth. In the end, it turned out to be a draw, and off the penalty kicks it went. And Cuba ends up winning 7-6 on PKs to advance to the final. A massive upset against the Costa Rican side that was favored to win the whole thing. And then on the opposite side, Panama beating Guatemala 6-3, taking advantage of some of those mistakes and some of those inconsistencies. They find their way into the final, which set up a historic final, by the way, because neither of these two teams have ever won a Concacaf Futsal Championship before. So even going into the final, we already knew we would be seeing history. In the third place match, we saw that Costa Rica and Guatemala face each other. Guatemala ultimately winning that game, but the final is really what we want to talk about here, and it was one for the history books, an instant classic. This young Cuban side against a Panamanian side that was very, very defensively intelligent, impatient, and at the end of the day, it came down to the wire, and Panama wins 4-3 to win their first ever Futsal CONCACAF Championship. Massive congratulations to Panama. Massive hat tip to Cuba as well. That squad's very young. We'll talk about it here now in the highs and the lows of the tournament. That's something that's going to make them very dangerous in future tournaments as far as I'm concerned. As long as these players stay in it, stay with it, and build on this experience, this is going to be a very dangerous team in the future. So one of the highs for me being that Cuban side. Let's talk about the teams that really impressed me over this tournament and see if you guys agree. It starts with Cuba. Their run was super impressive. A lot of guys in their early 20s on that squad that could really make a difference in future tournaments. They now have the experience and have felt the stamina required to make it from beginning to end of this thing. And I think in 4 years, they could be very, very potent and very dangerous and build on this and become a regular in that final. Dominican Republic was another big one for me. They had a historic win over the United States. I don't think they'd ever beat the United States prior to this tournament. and they got ahead pretty far ahead, to a point that they were practicing drills and other tactics. It was very clear that they were putting themselves out of their comfort zone for that second half and inviting pressure and trying different things to get ready for the rest of this tournament. United States tried to take advantage of that, but the Dominican Republic did a good job of holding them off, and they made a hell of a run in this tournament and were really, really impressive to watch. I didn't realize going into this tournament how much talent they had playing internationally. Players in Spain, players active in Italy, and then two of their goalkeepers coming from an English league as well, which maybe isn't one of the most premier leagues in the world, but certainly one that is building and growing at a very steady rate and has some good competition. So really interesting to see how that roster came together and was able to have so much synergy. It was very, very impressive. Now, in an opposite way, looking at Canada, a lot of their players I was high on because they came as groups in two major camps from two of the biggest futsal clubs in the country. And it was very clear that they had chemistry going into this tournament. They knew exactly where each other were going to be. Their play was very smooth, fluid. Even when they were losing a game at a point in the end of the second half where they could not make it back, it would not be physically possible. They fought like the game was tied. It was very enduring. And as someone whose team was having a hard time finding the will to even be there, it was refreshing to see our neighbors north of us do so well in this tournament. They absolutely deserved it. Congratulations to them. I'm going to do my very best to keep this straight to facts and save the rant for the second part 2 of this video sequence, but talk about the lows. Let's start with an easy one. Costa Rica. It's easy in the sense that I can talk about it easily. It's hard in the sense I don't know where to put my opinion on this one. Costa Rica was obviously very heavily favored to win their 4th straight futsal championship going into this tournament by most people. And I think that for us as outsiders watching Costa Rica, there shouldn't be anything to be ashamed of. They played very well. They played very tough competition. And hey, when you're at the top of the mountain, everyone is coming at you with their very best game to try and topple you. So they should really be proud of what they accomplished. They ultimately got the World Cup bid to make it into the slot for Concacaf to the World Cup. So they didn't lose a ton other than hardware. Obviously, hardware is also important, but that's kind of that weird tear in this tournament and the other regional tournaments that the qualification bit doesn't necessarily mean you have to make it to that final. So it's kind of a weird feeling, I'm sure, as you win that quarterfinal, but business isn't over. I would imagine if I was from Costa Rica, and the people from Costa Rica will feel this is a failure, they didn't quite have the dominant performances back to back that we're used to seeing. And then, of course, falling in penalties. They looked very tired in that match against Cuba. And I think that the demands of this tournament and playing so many days in a row and only having 1 day's rest was very difficult for them, being an older team in the tournament. I want to hear what you guys think, though. I've shared enough of my opinion. I've babbled on long enough. What did you guys think about the CONCACAF tournament? How much fun was it for you to watch? And how do you think these teams are going to do in the World Cup? I'm skeptical that they're going to perform well against the rest of the world just based on futsal development in other places, other countries, and federations. But I would love and will be cheering for every single CONCACAF team to move forward and to represent us well in the World Cup in Uzbekistan. Tell me who you think is going to stand out and who stood out to you in this last tournament. And until I hear from you then, don't forget to play with your soul.